Hello, hello, and welcome yet again to the David Messiah YouTube channel. This particular message is addressed to my brother, posting as Go Black to Africa, and it is a response to a recent video that he has posted in which he referenced a discussion at Hyde Park Corner, London, where there was a discussion as to, who are the real original people of Africa and indeed of the planet. And in the course of that discussion, was very sort of non-conclusive, I would say, is the best way to describe it. And I think because of that non-conclusivity, I want to make a very simple point in this response, and I will post this response to the comment section of Go Black to Africa's video, and I will also post it to the David Messiah YouTube channel. And the simple point I want to make is that there will remain a confusion as long as we use terms to describe ourselves, terms of identity, such as black, such as African, to describe who we are, because those are terms which are not really well defined in terms of the discussion that is being advanced. Because black is a term of skin color designation. Africa is a reference to a landmass, and so anybody that, whose foreparents or who are themselves having a sojourn on that landmass can, in some sense, call themselves African. And so it becomes a sort of a nonsense of terminology, because if indeed mankind originated, quote unquote, in Africa, then, in some sense, everybody is African. But that sort of, takes us nowhere. And so the simple point I want to make is that the issue is not skin color, the issue is not what landmass we, our forefathers, sojourned upon. The issue is from whose loins we come. And if we understand, or if we take that as the starting point, then we will not have a discussion as to who was first. Because if we go by the cosmology given in Scripture, around 4,000 years ago, there was a flood, a great flood that covered all the earth. And everything that was on the earth died off. And only 8 humans survived the flood. Noah, his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their 3 wives, the sons' 3 wives, and the wife of Noah. 8 people, that's it. So, and the ark came to rest upon the mountains of Ararat, which is in modern-day Turkey, and they all went down into that region today called Mesopotamia, the land between the 2 rivers of the Tigris and the Euphrates. And so that's where mankind restarted. It is from there that the earth was again repopulated. So if that is the cosmology that we have in mind, then the issue of who was first becomes a very moot point. And also the idea or the assumption, really, because it is an assumption, a speculative assumption, that mankind originated, quote unquote, in Africa, becomes a nonsense. because we were all there in that, or the forefathers to whom we all go back, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, all will go back to that same area between the two rivers of Mesopotamia. That's where, from our present vantage point in history, we all would have originated. Now, skin color comes into it, no doubt, because we now have upon the planet people ranging in skin color from a very, very dark black, or very, very dark skinned, or very, very melanated, to, of course, the palest of white skin, which we see in the albinos. And indeed, Noah, who was the father of all humankind, was himself albino. And that is an important point to help us to understand how even skin color variation arose after the flood. Because when Noah was born, it was obvious that he was depigmented, his father Lamech was concerned as to that, and he went to his father, who was Methuselah, and Methuselah went to Enoch to ask, well, what is this? Does that mean? And in fact, the question that he raised was that the boy might not have been his, but rather must have come from one of the fallen angels. Because they knew from before the flood that the offspring of fallen angels tended to be pale of skin. And that solid inference we can derive from the book of Enoch, chapter 105, verses 5 and 6, because what that passage lets us to know is that it was known from before the flood that the offspring of fallen angels tended to be, I'm not going to use the word white, I will use the word pale of skin, depigmented. So what that cosmology lets us to know is that of the people on the planet today, every one of us goes back to Noah. All humans go back to Noah through either Ham, Shem, or Japheth. And then there's another line which goes back not to Noah, but to one or other fallen angel. And that distinction is the crux of the issue as to skin color, and as to even the idea as to who came first. Because if we all came from the same father, well, who came first, that would resolve in a way that is not of very great interest, based on who was the first son, the second son, and the third son. Japheth was the first son. Shem was the second son, and Ham was the third son. But what Scripture lets us to know is that there came a point when the three sons who were there altogether in that Mesopotamian region, because it wouldn't take long for them to, because the population grows geometrically. So, as the generations came, we would have multiplied in that kind of a geometric fashion. So there would have come a point when the brothers decided, well, look, we need to sort of separate ourselves and divide up this land. And so we find in the book of Jubilees, chapter 8, that there came a point when the land was divided up. So Ham and they drew lots to decide who would get what. So Ham got the land down in Africa. Japheth got the land to the north, the cooler climes, and Shem got the land in the Middle Earth. I think it's how it's described in some places. But that division was only the areas close by the Mesopotamian region. It didn't cover all the earth. Because much later on, we find out in the book of 2nd Esdras, chapter 13, verses 40 chapter 45. At the time of the Assyrian captivity invasion, the northern tribes were scattered out of the land. And they were scattered to lands, quote unquote, where never before mankind dwelt. And those lands where mankind had not dwelt before included the Americas, included Northern Europe, Western Europe, Northern Europe to the east. It included Northeastern Europe, China, Japan, Mongolia, those places. It included the South Pacific, far South Pacific, and it included Africa, those parts of Africa where Ham had not taken up residence. And that's why the Israelites became the aboriginal people of all these lands, far-flung lands around the world, including sub-Saharan Africa. Because Ham had already taken up residence in the northeast Nile Valley area. He had already taken up residence in North Africa. Of his 4 sons, Ham's 4 sons, the eldest was Cush, and he was down there in the Nile Valley area. And then the next one, I think, was Mizraim, known as Egypt to the Greeks. Another one was Canaan, and Canaan went where he should not have gone, because Canaan went to land that was already divided up and assigned to Shem. And then there was the 4th one was Put, and Put took land in North Africa around now where Libya is, to the west of lands given and taken by Mizraim, by Egypt. Okay, well later on when we go to Genesis chapter 25, we find there was an offspring of Midian. Midian was one of those who descended from Abraham through his second wife or third wife, depending upon how you count, Keturah. And the children of Keturah, of Hagar, Ishmael, and so forth, they all took up residence in what is today the Arabian Peninsula. So they became the sort of forerunners of the Arab people, a word which simply literally means mixed, because they all were down there and mixed. But Ephir, who I think was the 4th son of Midian, who was of the line of Abraham through Keturah, Ephir decamped to North Africa, to a land that was towards the west of where Put's land was. Okay? And in the Hebrew language, if you have a sort of a branch of the family that goes elsewhere, goes abroad, okay, the letter, the Paleo-Hebrew letter that is used to describe one on the outside like that is the letter Ket. Okay, that is sort of a CH guttural. So it sounds like K, it can sound like C, it can sound like CH. So where Ephir went was called Ephirka, referring to Ephir over there. And so from the standpoint of those who remained in that land, the Arabian Peninsula, Ephirka was a reference to that land to which their brethren, Ephir, had sort of decamped. You understand? So they started giving the name Ephirka or Africa or Aprika to that area. It didn't refer originally to the whole landmass of Africa. It just referred originally to where Efer went. And where Efer went was actually part of what is today called Africa. Africa was also given names deriving from its Hamitic occupation. Al-Kebulan is one of those terms. Another term was Tameri that was used by the Egyptians. But the way language works is in a way that is not always predictable. Okay, so in a sense you could say, well, it should never have been named after an Arabian. It should have been named after the ones who were there first, who were the children of Ham. Well, that's not how it actually worked out. Okay, for all kinds of reasons, mostly historical reasons. Okay, so Efer gave his name to the land, and that is always how it is. Some person or some tribe of people will give their name to the land. The land per se does not, does not give its name to the people who sojourn there. Strictly speaking, okay? It is the people who sojourn in a place that first gives a name to a land. And then other people maybe can come and take on that name of the land that was already given by some other people. I'm saying that to say this. We, the Negro, are not African. We don't descend from Efer, who was himself descended from Midian. We are not Arabs. Okay? Nor are we in fact black, even though we use the word black today to refer to a skin color that more or less describes the skin color of us as Negroes. Because the word black in its original Paleo-Hebrew meaning, because that word also goes back to the ancient Hebrew. That is a word that means a thing of no worth. That's what that means. That's why there's so many negative connotations connected with that word black. It is literally, and that's the vibrational significance of the word, which will not go away, even if you try to use its referent. So even if you try to change its referent to refer now to a skin color or crayon color. Okay? So we are not defined by a skin color. There is no, in the sort of scriptural cosmology, there is no patriarch called black. And all of the sons of Noah that came off the ark, Japheth, Shem, and Ham would all today be considered black according to that designation. The only thing was that Japheth's line was that line that first became pale of skin because that son of Japheth, titular son of Japheth, whose name was Magog, in fact was not the son of Magog, but was the son of a fallen angel, Gog. And that is there in the boy's name. Magog means, in the Paleo-Hebrew, Amagog, or Amogog, which means the son of Gog. And he was a literal, physical, seed-line son of a fallen angel. So he was the first sort of pale skin. You understand? And scripture there in Genesis chapter 10 lets us to know that where Japheth went, that became known as the land of the Gentiles. You would think it would be described as the land of Japheth, but no, it was the land of the Gentiles. And that word Gentile, when you go to the original Paleo-Hebrew, in the root it's there, gen. There's a letter that they've now taken out of the alphabet, so you're not going to find it in modern Hebrew. It's a letter called Gya, and it's depicted by a wick, which is a twisted thing. It goes into a lamp where it's destined to be burnt. So a twisted, wicked thing is what it's depicting. So that letter Gya combined with the letter Nun, which is in English N, is saying the son of the wicked, the sons of fallen angels are wicked in the eyes of the Most High because they have no place on earth. They were not supposed to be here in the first place. And by definition, if an angel leaves his heavenly estate, he is in rebellion against the Most High. So he is definitionally wicked. His lot is there with Lucifer, who led the rebellion in heaven. You understand? So the power of that polluted seed of Magog was such because his sons and his daughters would have married amongst the other sons and daughters of the children of Japhet. But the power of that polluted seed was such that they all tended then to become pale of skin, and they all became, in effect, polluted to the extent that all of them are now called sons of the wicked by that designation of Gentile. So this is the cosmology that we should be using. That's where pale skin would have started from. But the idea that Africans were first is just a nonsense in that cosmological scheme. Now the other two, at least two other ways where pale skin became part of even those of the sons of Noah who were not infected by fallen angel seed. One of those was that mechanism called leprosy in the Bible. The other mechanism was albinism, which was already there with Noah. So that genetic predisposition to albinism was there with Noah from the beginning. Okay, and there's more to be said about that. We have the story of Gehazi, who was Israelite of the seed, therefore Negro. And by the way, let me just do a quick aside here. The word Negro definitionally is another Paleo-Hebrew word, a very good Paleo-Hebrew word. There's no inherent slur connected with that word. It derives from the word Nega, involving two Paleo-Hebrew letters, Nun, which is depicted by a seed, and so the meaning it carries is that of a son, okay, or a continuation of something like a seed line. And the other word is Ga, another letter which they have now removed from the alphabet. They changed it and now calling it Ayin, and they say it is silent. Anyway, so David was known by the praise title Nega. And the meaning of that word Nega is that son who is watched over. And that's by the Most High. That's why David was called the apple of God's eye. Now when you add the third letter Resh, which is depicted by a head, and then there's some, let me not go off on another tangent. I'm already on one tangent. When you add the letter Resh to it, it's adverting to the root, the tribal root of Nega David. Well, Nega David was of the tribal root of Judah. So the people of the tribal root of Nega David were called Negro. And a vocalization comes with many variations. It could be Negro. It could be Nagar, which we have in Indian languages. It could be Negara. It could be Nigra. It could be the Latin Niger. It could be Nigger. Okay, so there are endless variations, but really go back to the three-letter consonantal Nun Ga Resh, which adverts again to the tribal root of Nega David. And the word Nega praise title originally for David came to mean king. So Nega David is a way also of saying King David. And that meaning of the word Nega as king still survives. It's certainly there in the Indian languages, because there's a Buddhist prophecy. The word Buddha, by the way, is just a corruption of BaYuda. BaYuda meaning the house of Judah. And in that Buddhist prophecy, which would have derived from our people, the BaYuda or the Negro people, in that prophecy they say there will come a future Buddha whose name would be Nagarjuna. That's in the Indian language. Or Negajuna, and a variation as to that. So Nagar means king. It also means Negro. Nega, more correctly, means, of course, king. And then in the Ethiopic Hebrew, they still talk about the Kebra Negas as the book of the Chronicles of the Kings. That kingly line that was established by Menelik, who was the offspring of the liaison between Solomon and Sheba. So Nega, Nagar, Nega, and Negas is just plural form of that in the Ethiopic Hebrew. All mean king. So the word Negro is adverting to our relationship to King David. That's what the word means. And so it is just a synonym for the BaYuda people, originally. Okay. So, where was I going? Yeah. So we, the Negro, are... Oh, no, that's where was I? I know I started off on a tangent, but I should have put a better pin to pin the thought. Okay, all right. So let me go back to the very beginning. I'm talking about the cosmology that comes out of Scripture. Now, if you go with the alternative cosmology, which the Gentiles have been trying to foist upon us, and there were traces of that in that discussion there at Hyde Park, where the brother there, the Muslim brother, he was a fellow countryman of mine. I know the accent. He's from Trinidad, just like I am. He was talking about Homo sapiens. As soon as you use the word Homo sapiens, you are putting yourself under an umbrella, a cosmological umbrella, and all the assumptions that go with that cosmology having to do with Big Bang ideas and evolution ideas, as was brought to us by people like Charles Darwin. Okay? And under that cosmology, first of all, they take no cognizance of the flood, the great flood. And they have the idea that the earth is 4 to 5 billion years old. Okay, and it came, the sort of the Big Bang origin was 15 to 20 billion years ago. And with such a long stretch of time, all that is today, cosmologically, would have evolved, okay, starting with an energy matter Big Bang. And the first hominid, that's another word they use, which I really don't know what it means, except it's some kind of a man, isn't it? Or the first hominid, that might have been the Neanderthals, I don't know. Because, they're speculating about all these things. They just see some bones, and they think that they take DNA science and they make great big leaps based on DNA science, which they ought not to do. But that's on a whole other subject, which I won't get into on this occasion. But if you're using that alternative cosmology, now you can start asking, well, who was first? Did man originate in Africa? And so you have this idea of African man. And if man originated in Africa, but spread out to all the globe, okay, then in some sense you can now say, well, everybody is an African. Okay, or the original man was Africa, or the original man was black. Well, if the original man was African and the original man was black, where did the white people come from? That becomes not the issue, you see. So even if they've changed color, they're still African, isn't it? They would still have come from us, isn't it? But this is not what scriptural cosmology lets us plainly to know. The difference between some pale skins and the humans that descend from Noah, ultimately from Adam, the difference is that there is a seed line, a paternal seed line, that goes back to a fallen angel. Okay, and it is from that seed line that you get those who are called Gins, or in the English, Gentile. But that word Gin in the original Paleo Hebrew is also the origin of the Arabic word Jinn, and is also the origin, well, not the origin, but it's also the basis of the idea in English of that idea of a demon. Because what happens when a jinn dies, because they are descended from a fallen angel, they certainly don't go back to the bosom of Abraham. They don't go back to the father either. Their spirit, discarnate spirit, is left to wander the earth. And we have in Book of Jubilees, I forget the chapter now offhand, where it is described that the Most High gave special permission to let them. And the master of these jinns is indeed Satan. Okay, and some of them are very terrible and some of them are not so terrible. But they continue to have appetites. They have thirst for water. They have hunger for food. They have appetite for sex. They have appetite for drink, for alcohol. They have appetite for drugs. They have all the appetites for power. Okay? And in order to sate those appetites, they attach themselves to living humans, or living anybody really, but anyone that is in the flesh, through whom they can kind of second hand slake those appetites. So they serve a useful purpose, because if one is sort of given over to too much drink, alcoholism or what have you, then they would bring attention to that problem to the person that is suffering from it. Okay, so they do serve a useful purpose, but they are different, and indeed they are subject to their father, who is the devil. And this is who so-called Jesus, his name is Yeshua, was referring to there in the book of John, chapter 8, I think around verse 33, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, you are of your father, the devil. Okay. Now, what has happened is that you now have essentially two main lines on the planet. There is the human line, go back to Noah, go back to Adam through Noah, okay, without pollution. By the other line, which is infected by fallen angel seed, that original Gog, okay, that infected the line of Japheth. And there would have been others. He would not have been the only one. Okay. So that is and what the Most High did was to choose the line of Jacob to be an heirloom seed that he tried to keep separate from that polluting effect, which is prefigured by the name Japhet, because the name Japhet means he who expands. So that Japhet, but the Japhet who was infected by the fallen angel Gog, that line came now to mix and mix and mix and mix with all the other lines. And the seed, the chosen seed, was supposed to remain an heirloom seed, relatively uninfected by that pollution. I say relatively because even amongst the 12 tribes of Israel, it looks as though the tribe of Dan has been given over to that pollution. This is why they're not represented among the 144,000 elect. And Ephraim also was allowed to be somehow infected. Okay, the scripture says in Hosea, and he mixed with the people, and is described as a cake not turned, meaning to say he's sort of Negro on the bottom, but on the top he turned white. A lot of Ephraim would have turned white. Okay, so it is a very complicated issue, even the scriptural cosmology, but it cannot be reconciled with this sort of Darwinian cosmology that so many people now take for granted. And the question or the idea is, as you know, the idea of man originated in Africa sort of presupposes that Darwinian cosmology, and it is an error. And it also, it also leads us to this idea that there's meaning in talking about black people as opposed to, let us say, white people. Because there's some Israelites who basically would have turned white. We know that, as we're referencing Gehazi. Yes, Gehazi was that one who was cursed, and he was an Israelite of the seed, a Negro, but he was cursed with leprosy. He went out from the presence of his master, who was Elisha, a leper white as snow. And the curse was that all his seed after him also would be white. But straight away lets you know that there would be today Israelite people on the planet who are white of skin. And this is also attested to in the book of Mormon. When you read about the Nephites, there's nothing in the description of the Nephites to suggest that they were fallen angel seed, but they were white. You understand? So that's where I'd like to end this. If one is going to address many of these questions of identity in any kind of a way that is coherent and cogent, we must be very clear as to the cosmology from which we proceed. And my suggestion is that the cosmology that is being foisted upon us usually is just sort of slides in, and not given any kind of, nobody sort of examines. If somebody talk about Homo sapiens and then Homo sapiens sapiens and use those terms as though they have actual meaning, they're foisting a false assumption upon us. And worse, if they talk about hominids, another sort of a false assumption being foisted upon us that has no real truth in fact. And so even that whole discussion as to, the Neanderthals, I want to know if they're Neanderthals, okay, do they come from Noah? Okay? Are they human? Do they come from Noah or ultimately Adam through Noah, or do they come from a fallen angel? That's all I want to know, because I do not accept this false cosmology foisted upon us by Darwin and this other, the physical cosmology. So that's where I would end this. And I end it by saying all praises, all glory, all exaltation be unto the Most High, Yahweh. And to all those still listening, I say Shalom.